And that is not saying we shouldn't be pursuing solar, wind, carbon capture, geothermal,
more hydro,
all of that. Gerbils running on treadwheels, whatever. But there is no policy that doesn't involve some level of continued reliance on oil and gas for a long term during the transition.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. And today, our guest is Bob Loeffler. He is a professor at UAA's Institute of Social and Economic Research, commonly referred to as ISER. He teaches courses on the mining industry, as well as natural resource policy and public land management. Before ISER, he worked for Alaska's Department of Natural Resources, commonly referred to as DNR. Initially in 1996 as coordinator for the permitting of large mines, and for 7 years as the director of the Division of Mining, Land, and Water. After DNR, he took a job with Jade North, a consulting firm specialized in natural resource issues, where he works on mining, permitting, and policy issues for industry, local government, and native corporations. He still works part-time for Jade North. Before we get started, I need to define a couple of acronyms and a term. DEC. DEC stands for Department of Environmental Conservation. EIS. EIS stands for Environmental Impact Study. And placer. The term placer refers to a type of mining that uses water and gravity to separate the desired material from surrounding material, usually sand. Panning for gold is a type of placer mining.
Bob Loeffler, welcome to the podcast.
Why, thank you.
Let's hear a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up?
I grew up, born in New York, grew up in Minnesota, went to school in college in California and Massachusetts.
And how did you end up in Alaska?
Oh, after I graduated from college, it seemed like adventure, and I came up here with the U.S. Geological Survey. They had a job up here, and I went, cool.
And you were a geologist?
No, actually, I don't know. I came up here as a hydrologist.
Okay. But, and that as your degree was in?
I have a degree. I have a master's degree in environmental engineering, and then I went back for a master's degree in regional planning.
Okay.
So I tell the engineers that I have an engineering degree, and I tell everybody else I have a planning degree. And I do research at the Institute of Social and Economic Research. I'm not an economist, but I do a lot of economic research with economic principles.
And you're here today to talk about mines. Mm-hmm. And I guess, what's your background in mines, and where did you know?
So, interestingly, I worked at DNR since I was a child, Department of Natural Resources. And at one point, I was then working somewhere else at DEC, and the deputy commissioner asked me to apply for a job permitting mine coordinating. And I was like, mines? Why would I work in mines, Marty? And she said, Bob, shut up. I know you. You're going to like it. Just take the damn job. And she did know me, and I liked it. I took the job, and I really liked it. I thought it was really fun. This was 1996. And DNR, Fish and Game, and DEC were working collegially as a functioning team, and it was really fun to work with people who liked each other and worked well together. And regulating mining is the intersection of science and public policy, and that's always interested me, and it's fun to do both.
What year did you make it up to Alaska?
1977.
1977. Wow. So
no, I'm clearly an old person. Your podcast would not have known that, I'm sure, but I admit I'm old.
So you had been in Alaska for almost 20 years before you dove into mining.
That's correct.
Did you know the history of mining in Alaska, or just sort of cursory?
I didn't know it much at the time, no.
But you know it now.
Yes.
So
I teach. So I'm a half-time professor at ISER, and just for truth in advertising, Alaska Metals Mining, which is a coalition of large mines, gave gives a grant to the university each year, and the university got confused and hired me. So while my client is the university, you do need to know where the money comes from. And so I do research in a variety of disciplines, of which sort of research services is one. I teach at the university, and I just finished a class on an overview of the mining industry. I also teach about the Alaskan economy, and I do a lot of community teaching on mining, including history.
Thank you for that. I'm going to give you a little bit of why I have you here. I mean, I'm a new legislator. Mining is probably an area that I'm least well informed, for lack of a better word. And I need you in the next 45 minutes to basically give me the overall, mining for dummies. Like, what do I need to know about mining in Alaska so that I can participate in a, mildly informed capacity in my job as a legislator?
Well, if you don't know much about mining, then I would say you represent your constituents quite well. Prior to World War II, everybody would know someone who works in a mine. In October 1942, Roosevelt shut down all the non-essential mines in Alaska, and we really had a very small placer industry from 1942 to 1989, when Greens Creek and Red Dog were permitted. And so mines are relatively large mines are relatively new, if you think 1989 is new. And they're not around South Central Alaska. So people really don't know a lot about it.
But we do know that there was the Klondike Gold Rush.
Yes.
We know about people pouring into Alaska for gold and at the end of the 19th century.
Well, if you look at a lot of the white names, clearly the natives have been here for tens of thousands of years. But Juneau was started from mining. You have Flat, you have Iditarod, you have the Klondike. Fairbanks began with mining. The Parks Highway was to connect a seaport to the Fairbanks mining district. Mines, Cordova, at one point, well, it was always fishing, was also at one point the entry place for the Kennecott mine. A lot of the names in history involved mining. And so we had a lot until World War II. And then we really had a break until about 1989.
I'm going to ask a couple of questions about some of the mines that you just spoke about that will show some of my ignorance. My family goes to McCarthy usually every summer. We go up to Kennecott. I've done the tours. I've always found it very surprising that we got all the copper out, that there's no more copper there.
You're not an expert. I'm not knowledgeable on Kennecott, so I don't know.
Well, it's an interesting thing that it was like a big boom town for a few years. And then, it seems like, what they tell you is that they had exhausted it, and there is no more. That's not.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not knowledgeable.
Well, I guess talking about mines in general. I guess is that how it works? Do you go into an area? Do you take all of that element or whatever you're mining out?
Sure.
And then you're done.
The answer is that yes and no. Certainly, overall, that's what you do. There are a couple of caveats to that. One is that you're always looking for more resources. So Greens Creek was founded in 1989 with a 12-year reserve, meaning they could mine for 12 years. They currently have a 12-year reserve, and that was 34 years ago. They're still looking for more. Pogo was founded with I can't remember, but it was a relatively recent reserve, and they keep going.
And for our listeners, Greens Creek is, what are they mining?
Greens Creek is mining silver, lead, zinc, and Pogo is mining gold. Thank you for asking that. Greens Creek is within the borough of Juneau, and Pogo is 48 miles northeast of Delta, Alaska. So that mines tend to go much longer than they originally were permitted for. And partially what happens is the company goes, okay, I'm going to locate this mine, and I have enough to permit the mine to make it economical. But then if I can find step out deposits, I already have the infrastructure. So they're going to be a lot cheaper to develop. So then they do the exploration after that, or additional exploration. So that certainly happens. The next thing that's happened is that the technology has changed. So things that we would not have mined 40 years ago or 60 years ago, we mine today. But ultimately, mining runs out.
What are the mines that are your specialty, the ones that you can speak about with the most authority?
I'm typically there for hard rock and coal mines. So we have 5 hard rock mines in Alaska. Red Dog, north of Kotzebue. Fort Knox, which is a commuting mine from Fairbanks. Pogo, which is northeast of Delta, southeast of Fairbanks. Greens Creek and Kensington within the Juneau Borough. And the User Valley coal mine, which has been going often from the 1930s near Healy. Those are really my specialties.
Roger. I
know a little bit about placer, but I'm not as smart as I could be.
So I assume, and this is 100% assumption, that
I always enjoy contradicting legislators. So keep going.
Well, that when we started mining, when the gold rush happened and folks rushed into mine, that there was very little regulation and people were just, getting the gold out however which way they could. And that we would have had the worst environmental impacts from that type of mining. And that as the decades have gone by, that we have more sophisticated ways of mining that are less negatively impactful of the environment around it.
I think it's both worse and better than that. So that it's completely correct that we were unregulated. In many of the early days, the major chemical they used to separate gold from gravel was water. And so while there was completely unregulated and they threw the stuff in the creeks and it destroyed the creeks, there weren't a lot of chemicals. Miners did use mercury sometimes, which is why you have the Red Devil issue out in the Kuskokwim. But
can you teach us a little bit about the Red Devil issue out in the Kuskokwim?
The Red Devil, they used mercury. Red Devil was a mercury deposit, and so mining mercury left lots of mercury around. And all of the stuff that they didn't use, they threw in the river. So mercury is there's a lot of mercury in that area.
So I assume like the fish are inedible in that area?
Well, it's in a small part. Okay. Yes, it's not, right. And so our use of chemicals has accelerated, but so has our regulation. So prior to 1970, I would put the regulatory era for mining into three eras. And if you might pass the test if you take it in my course. But prior to 1976 was the Clean Water Act. And all this stuff was not regulated, really. They just threw stuff out. Between 1976 and about 1990, we didn't figure out to hard rock mines. Hard rock mines are very complex. And so people were figuring it out, but they didn't really know. And so 1990 to now, it's all about keeping the water clean. That is all people talk about. The technology's changed. The regulatory regime has changed. What people do, the attitude, it's all changed from about 1990. So prior to 1976, most large mines became a Superfund site. From 1976 to 1990, some still did.
The Superfund is a federal environmental remediation program, which is administered by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. It is designed to clean up sites contaminated with hazardous substances. Sites that are managed under this program are referred to as Superfund sites, and they tend to be extremely polluted.
Nothing has, since no mine that started in like 1991 or 92, around then, has become a Superfund site. And that's a very low bar, so saying you didn't become a Superfund site is not necessarily a compliment, but it's an indication of how things have changed. We have much better indications of how things have changed, which I'm happy to go over. But really mining, in terms of its regulatory regime, there's been a huge change in in the lifetime of me as a regulator.
So,
which is also because I'm old. But
well, and I think I mentioned this to you, that one reason why I'm interested in mines is that it is something that I had one constituent who has emailed me, discussed with me, brought up with me, which, I represent the universities. I'm the center of Anchorage,
Right.
So, like you said at the beginning, most folks in South Central don't know a lot about mining and aren't that invested in what's happening with mining other than what they read in the newspaper. So, this particular constituent's major concern is the state getting enough back from mining in terms of revenue in exchange for the potential damage that mines could be doing to the state?
Well,
And that constituent's position is that we're not, that we should be getting more.
sure. So let me take the two parts. One
Okay.
is first damage, and the second is money. We shouldn't be permitting mines that have a significant effect on fish or wildlife. And I think all of the various EISs that we've done, many of them are backward looking, right? Like when Red Dog goes to its second pit, they say, well, what happened to the first pit? And we've not had a significant
And is it
impact.
because Red Dog started in that period where they weren't really applying the
but
Clean
I know-
Water Act?
No, Red Dog has not had a significant effect on.
Okay,
It's
gotcha.
had a very, according to the IIS, it's had a positive effect on fish.
Okay.
So we have not had mines that have had a significant effect on fish or wildlife.
Can you explain how Red Dog had a positive effect on fish?
Sure. Yes. So the Red Dog Creek went through the ore body before there was a mine. That's how they found it. And it had a flush of zinc every time the spring happened, and it killed all the fish until it got diluted. So fish that were
So there was
coming-
like natural pollution happening.
natural pollution. And so by controlling that portion of the creek now goes through a pipe through Red Dog. And so that you don't have that anymore. So now, mind you, the people in Kivalina still do not trust the fish. So, but Fish and Game's publications and annual monitoring shows that there is much less zinc going down the river and much less metals in the fish than there were prior to mining.
Did Red Dog do that because they wanted to improve the water or because they wanted to mine the zinc? So they
Red Dog put so the above mining flow goes through Red Dog in a pipe. They did that. I don't know if it's partly because Red Dog wanted them, and partly because Fish and Game and DEC made them, somewhere in between there, but because they have to meet water quality standards. You don't get to discharge stuff.
even if it was naturally occurring before.
No, you don't. Right. I mean, there are exceptions in ways that you have but no, you don't.
That's interesting.
Also, Fort Knox has improved the fishery. And that was because the fishery was trashed by mining in the early 1900s, and they reclaimed the area. Now they have, in South Central, we wouldn't think of it as real fish because it doesn't involve salmon. But, those people in Fairbanks, they work with lesser fish.
So it seems like what the lower 48 thinks about, what we see in the media is this concern for major pollution with mines. But it sounds like the mine that there is actually that there's some misinformation if Red Dog and Fort Knox have actually improved the water quality. And that's not something that I hear about.
No, that's right. I mean, people generalize, and really mining in the old days, really all about water, right? It's really water. Every mine has its own issue, which is really important.
I guess, can you explain the children's book version of is a miner going into a tunnel and taking a chisel and, getting some rock out of the side of the wall and then carrying it out like there's no water. So
here,
teach me.
Sure. And let me begin with something that I stole from DEC. According to DEC, mining's a water project. Gold, it's a byproduct. So I was telling that to a client because he said, "You mean you're telling me I have a water project with a gold problem?" And I was like, "Yeah, pretty much." So The answer is as you crush. So when that miner took that rock out,
Mhm.
it might have been the size of a small refrigerator or a cantaloupe. And in current mines, they then grind it up to the size of sand or silt. And they apply chemicals to get the gold or whatever the target mineral is. But all the water that flows through that area now they used to flow around, through cracks, and there was limited surface area. But now that you have much greater surface area, whatever else is in that ore gets leached at a faster rate. So if you had a mine that you were looking at gold and it had unobtainium in it, or, I'm making this up, obviously. Well, when you crush that rock, there's going to be more unobtainium going out in the water. So what you have to worry about is the quality of the water that is flowing through that area during and after mining. And that's the issue.
And so do they have to take the potential byproduct that would end up in the water out, like dispose of it in some way that it doesn't get into the water?
Well,
or
there's a whole variety of mechanisms that they use. But so all of the waste rock, or tailings. So about 99% of what they take out of an open pit is either waste rock or tailings. It's not ore. They got to put it somewhere, and it rains, and you can minimize the water going through the tailings, but you can't. It's hard to eliminate. So there's a whole variety of things you can do, and mind you, not all mines have a lot of other minerals. So Fort Knox is mostly like gold and quartz. It's got a little bit of arsenic and antimony, but not a lot. Other mines have a whole lot. So it's very mine dependent. So it's very hard to generalize and say, oh my God, we have to really work on this. So I had one of my clients find that had nothing else in it. Like you could have ground up the waste rock and used it in daycare centers. Some mines you have to really worry.
So that's the luck of the draw. You might end up with a mine where you can take your product out and whatever waste.
Right, but you have to know. You'll know a lot about that before you're permitted.
So this came up. I interviewed Dan O'Neill from Fairbanks about his book about the Upper Yukon, and he talked in the book about people coming up to sample the water quality of the Upper Yukon, and one of the mistakes they were making is that they were sending somebody up one day, once a year, to sample the water. But of course, depending
on what people were doing, it could be
how much rainfall had happened 3 days before, what season it was, whether the ice was melting, whether they were at low. It's like the water quality varies drastically from season to season, but from day to day based on what the weather is doing. And I'm thinking about if there's been a ton of rainfall one year or not a ton of rainfall, or how do they get the water? How do they check?
How do they measure it?
Yes.
Can I back up and give you an answer which is more comprehensive? So in my view, permitting is the promise that things will be okay. But, you have children, I have children. Promises are fine, but you have to check up. So monitoring is the proof. So monitoring is the evaluation of whether you've kept your promise. And we monitor in 3 ways. You've asked only about one of them, which is the water quality monitoring. So they do water quality monitoring all over the world. They do this. Alaska is not unique. We monitor the surface and groundwater, and there's an established frequency, which depends on what it is. So if some things that come out of the pipe, they monitor continuously, right? They have a gauge that just does. Some things is weekly, some things is monthly, some things are quarterly. And so it's really, I'm pretty confident that goes, that you should catch things.
Gotcha.
The second thing we do is, and this was invented by the Department of Fish and Game, and Al Ott, and at the time Phyllis Scanlon Weber deserve a lot of credit, and Fish and Game does. They do biomonitoring. So once a year, they look at they look at fish population, habitat, but then they look at the algae, see if the algae are becoming more metals tolerant minerals or metals tolerant algae. They look at the benthic environment to see if the bugs are doing okay. And then they take the juvenile fish, which are most susceptible to metals, and metals issue, and they, I don't know quite what they do, but conceptually, they put them in like a lab quality blender, blend them up and see what the metals are. And so that will tell you whether over the year, if the fish are okay. And if you're that's not designed for a permit violation. That's designed to catch trends before they're a problem. So if you notice that metals are accumulating in the fish, you should be able to find that before it is even an issue on fish health. And so they do that kind of monitoring. And that's very powerful to tell you whether there is a problem. And you should catch that problem before it's a problem, hopefully. The third kind of monitoring we do in Alaska, and that monitoring is very unique internationally. It's not unknown, but it's unique. It's not unknown, but it's unusual. The third kind of monitoring we do is we do process monitoring, where every 5 years, for all of our major mines, we hire a third-party consultant, we in the company, and it's a public process where we say, we want you to look at everything the mine's done and make sure they're in compliance, somebody not the state. And we also say, and could you look at the state and see if we're adequately monitoring the mine? Now, we don't usually get state. Now, we don't use that to a great extent. We should use that more, in my opinion. So it's a small part of that audit, but it's a public process. Anybody can come to that and say, hey, I think the culverts are jacking. Hey, I think the state guys aren't really trained. Hey, I think they should go more often. And we monitor the process, the benthic, the biology downstream, and the water. And we have a very, very comprehensive monitoring process. And that's not the companies. That's Fish and Game and DNR impose that on the companies. I mean, companies don't resist it, but we should be proud of what our agencies have done.
So I would say if I were to generalize what I've learned is that there's a robust system in place for making sure that mines aren't harming the environment.
That's right. And we mostly talked about water.
And now we can talk about money.
Okay. Now, thank you. I would have completely forgot about that. Dr. Steve Colt and I have done 2 studies where we compared. And we really said, what did we spend from I'm going to back up. There are different ways to look at what we should be getting. So let me go through different ways of looking at it. Dr. Colt and I did a study where we compared what the state spends and what the state receives for commercial fishing, tourism, and mining. We did it for 2 4-year periods. So one way to look at it is, do we spend more than we get? For commercial fishing, the state does spend a little more than it gets. Now, if you include municipalities, the reason we have industries is not just to make the state richer, right? And commercial fishing supports our communities. It supports lots of employment. It's really the foundation for many of our coastal communities. So the fact that it's not a moneymaker for the state is sort of irrelevant. Tourism, we do make some money. Mining, we make 8 to 10 times what we spend. Not because we spend a lot, not because we get a lot, but because we don't spend shit. Now, the next question is, do we get enough, right? Just because and we get about the same amount from mining, commercial fishing, and tourism. And it's a rounding error on the state budget. So it just isn't much. So if you said, ooh, we could get like 30% more, it's like so flucking what we would never notice in the state budget. The last way to look at it, so just to give you, in the last 4 years, which we did before the pandemic, mining, commercial fishing, and tourism were in the $70 to $80 million range for each one of them. It's not a lot. I'm sure you would, as a legislator, you would enjoy getting $80 million more, but in the 4 point.
Right, but it's not very much.
No, it's not much. So then the question is how to compare whether we should be getting more. And I'm not going to come out and tell you we get too much or not enough, but if we compare what we get with Alaska, there are a couple ways to look at it. One is what we get relatively in line with what our competitors, which are international. In a study that the Department of Revenue had done like 15 years ago, was we were right about in the middle. And my impression is that we're about in the middle.
Meaning that half of the countries are getting more, half the countries are getting less.
Yeah, we're right. We're right about what a lot of the major get. The second is if you look at the record to see if, like, have we been getting lots and lots of money? Right. In other words, are the companies going, "Oh my God, Alaska's a gold mine. Let's all go there." One is we haven't had a huge record, or a great record. Red Dog took 17 years to get back its capital investment. That is not what they were expecting.
They thought it would come a lot faster.
Oh yeah, nobody invests with that expectation. Greens Creek had to shut down in the early 90s because of prices. Fort Knox took some write downs on their asset in the 1990s. Illinois Creek went bankrupt. So when you look back, you go, "Oh, this is not an industry that we really that has had like a huge amount of."
And is it because they didn't get? Well, I'm guessing with Greens Creek is because the prices were too low. But with Red Dog taking 17 years, was it also a price issue, or was it?
They're all price issues.
It's all price issues.
Right.
It's not because they're not getting as much out as quickly as they thought.
No, it's not actually. There was a third way to look at it. And that is mining, more than any other industry, is what I call economically a lottery industry. So most exploration projects don't end up in a mine. It takes hundreds to end up in a mine. So if you look,
meaning that you look at 100 different sites and one of them will potentially have
right, or 1,000 sites, yes. So
there's a lot of money spent in exploration that does not result in any product.
That's right. So in other words, it takes one win has to pay for many losses.
Right. It's kind of like pharmaceuticals. I mean, that
that's right.
you develop tons of medications that don't work, so you charge a lot for the one medication that does work to pay for all those ones that didn't work.
Actually, I had one of my female students when I was discussing this, and she said, "Oh, mining's a fairy tale industry." And I was like, "What?" She said, "Yeah, girl's got to kiss a lot of frogs before she finds her prince." But yes, that's right. So those are the ways I would look at it. Whether we get enough or not is a value judgment I'll leave to others. Actually, there is one other way, and that is if one or two of our major mines were to come into production, Donlin, for example, or maybe even Graphite One, over the long run, we're likely to get more money than we would get from raising taxes. That's just math. So in the question of whether you grow the herd or milk the cow, so to speak, if you could grow the herd, that would be the easiest way to increase.
Do you believe that there's still a lot of potential mining left to be done in Alaska?
Oh, yeah.
We just haven't found them.
Well, yes, we haven't found them. And incidentally, 70% of our exploration is within 30 miles of a road or the ocean, right? Infrastructure matters. You can take gold out in your pocket, but copper, zinc, it's truckloads or barges. And so our lack of infrastructure limits where people explore. Donlin is off the road system, if should it ever be developed, as was Pebble. Pebble's sort of dead, but
we didn't really do ground rules. I'm sort of avoiding controversial topics.
I actually would like to avoid Pebble's tribal, right? You say something good about Pebble, the anti-Pebble tribe hates you. Say something bad about Pebble, the other tribe.
Oh, I wasn't going to go to Pebble.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But I'm going to talk about it in a general way, something that we're not going to talk about, but is about infrastructure and about who's responsible for building up infrastructure if it's predominantly going to benefit one company. I mean, and I think, so when we talk about mining and potential new mines, if there's a new mine coming on board, that's going to be using the road system that is nearby, and that road system requires a lot of upgrades. I mean, is it
So I'm not really smart about man show. If that's what
okay?
you're talking
Yes,
about.
it is.
I'm really not. I mean, typically we have a tax system and trucks effect. I mean, in general, large projects have paid for infrastructure. I'm assuming that the oil industry has paid for the Dalton Highway many times over. Red Dog paid for their road and is now a profit center to the state. I assume that the Ambler Road would be similar. West Usitna having public, I don't know, but I don't really know enough about Man Show. I do know we've accepted a lot of money as an interstate highway and it's taxed, but I don't know much more than that.
No, that was good. Thank you. So, rare earth. I mean, that's something that's kind of in the zeitgeist.
Right.
Talking about. Yeah, it's very hip. That the only place we're really getting a lot of rare earth out is China. There's the potential for, I guess, California and Alaska potentially having rare earth.
So, rare earths, interesting enough, are not particularly rare. They're all over the place.
Okay.
Right? The problem is processing them. So right now, all of our rare earth elements are processed in China. If we had a rare earth mine, it would be, unless we develop the processing somewhere, and it probably wouldn't be Alaska. It doesn't change our economic security if it goes through China. We do process a few rare earths through as a byproduct of other minerals. So Red Dog, germanium and dysprosium or something. They all have names which sound alike to me. And it goes out with their concentrate to the smelter, and sometimes the smelter takes it out, and sometimes they waste it because it's a small amount. So rare earth minerals are very important to our economy. They are volumetrically they are very small. So we do have a potential rare earth mine in near Ketchikan, which hasn't really been actively explored for a number of years, and we have an operating mine in California, Mountain Pass, which has been going out of business for off and on for about 25 years, has a very rich ore, and they haven't been able to figure out a way not to send that ore to China.
Got it.
But if you look at our industry as a whole, I don't think I'd concentrate on rare earths. It's just it's unlikely to be a big part of our employment, economic production, royalties, taxes. But it's a great thing.
What should we focus on? What, in your opinion, would be a more profitable, more...
Are you asking what the industry should focus on or what the state should do?
I don't know, both.
Let's look at what the state should do first.
Okay.
I believe the most important thing that we should do is keep our permitting system robust so we can rely on it. Right now, I believe that we need to hire more people and pay them better. That is, for DNR, Fish and Game, and DEC. That is, if the right two people in DEC retire, and I know who they are, and so does the commissioner, nobody's going to get a permit for 2 or 3 years because it's just that complex. We need more people, and we need to pay them more. And that's the most important thing we could do for the state for keeping the industry. Right now, we have a problem federally in that our permitting, mostly the EIS system, is just broken. And that's not necessarily mining, it's all projects. I mean, it's all projects nationally, right? If you look at a transmission line somewhere, it just takes so long.
And you believe it's a federal problem, like the federal regulation. It's not something that we at the state can fix.
That's right. And yelling at the feds has not seemed to be particularly productive.
How long does it, like, let's say you discover an ore, like you're profitable. You want to start, and it's, I don't know, someplace that has never had a mine before.
It could easily, in this country, take 5 to 10 years. And that's longer than it's longer than the business cycle, longer than the CEO has. And it would be, so when EISers first started,
What's EIS?
An environmental impact statement. So
Okay.
it's the Federal National Environmental Policy Act. It's the environmental impact process, and it's not a permit. It's just an evaluation of the impacts. Say it's a sunlight document. What are the impacts? What are alternatives we could do to lessen those impacts? That's all it is. And then you write the permits later. So let's look at the Ambler Road. Now, the Ambler Road is a road, right? They've been working on it for 6 or 7 years. They got one done. They said it wasn't good enough. We're going to do it again. It hasn't changed the location. It hasn't changed the width. It hasn't changed anything. It's just a road. We sort of know what roads can do, right? It doesn't take 7 years to figure that out. It's ridiculous. Now, I'm not. If you don't like the Ambler Road, then they should say no. I mean, through the permits, not through. If you do like it, they should say yes, whatever. But it's like, if you have to look at a frog, don't eat it. If you have to eat a frog, don't look at it too long. Our Greens Creek has been in existence since 1989. They have what they call a dry stack tailings facility, which they need to expand by about 15 acres. They've had 3 EISs done on that dry stack. It's taken them 3.5 years to do. Like, nowhere else, no other developed country would say, well, we know what this does because it's been there for 30 years. Doesn't have a huge amount of issues. We've done 3 EISs on it. Let's take 3.5 years to figure it out. No other jurisdiction in the world does that.
I'm going to make an analogy.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
This isn't just mining. This is really a lot
Construction.
of any infrastructure project with significant opposition at all.
Right. Well, what I would say is it comes up not just in Alaska, in California as well, that when folks don't want something built near their home, they start off by trying to stop it through saying that they don't want this near their home for blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they become an expert in whatever cricket or frog or lives there, because that's a way of at least delaying it, is saying that they know that they're going to be, that this isn't about not wanting this particular structure there. It's more that they've suddenly become very concerned with the water, whatever it might be, in order, as a way of delaying a project that they don't want built for other reasons.
Yes. Although I wouldn't blame all on the Endangered Species Act, but yeah, you're right. I mean, and frankly, many of those might oppose whatever project that is for perfectly reasonable reasons, right? It's not like people may go, oh, I don't want more traffic near my house, and that may be reasonable. But whatever we're going to decide, like, okay, we get it. There's more traffic. Here's the noise. We're done. The answer is yes or no. Through the permit system. But like, there's traffic. Let's study it for another 9 years is a little silly.
Right.
9 years is an exaggeration.
So that's the state.
But the permit, the EIS process is really federal. The state is not. That's not a state process. We have permit processes.
So there was a lot of controversy in the legislature regarding 404.
404 assumption, yes.
Yeah. I mean, is that what we're talking about here, or is it different?
No, that's very different. So, truth in advertising, I'm half-time at the university. My consulting firm did the feasibility study for the 404 assumption process, which is assuming the portion of the state wetlands permitting, which the federal government will let you assume. The environmental impact state process is completely separate.
Well, in my limited understanding as a South Central Anchorage legislator, that what you were just talking about, the importance of keeping and retaining experts in this field in our departments, what we were told is that to take over, for the state to take over 404, that we would require an additional number of employees who are experts in this field that we just simply could not suddenly have, that we could not possibly acquire the amount of expertise that would be needed for us to do that in a thorough manner. And that.
So we did the feasibility study, and I started out with a different opinion than I ended up with. And
where did you start out?
I started out with I didn't really know whether it was a good idea or not. And here is sort of where I've ended up. For one, the federal government will not allow us to take over the program without the expertise. So because it's a federal program we'll be taking over, they look at us and they audit the program. And if we can't do it, at least to their minimum standards, they'll take it away.
Got it. So basically, you'd be like contracting from the federal government. Instead of having them do it, you'll do it, and they're going to watch and make sure that you do it.
We do that now with our water discharge and our air quality standards. And for the coal mining regulation, they all do it the same. So it is. So I suspect we probably could, but it would take a lot of effort to do it. But here is really what I see as the advantage. Back when I was director of the Division of Mining, Land, and Water at DNR, when there were federal issues, we would go over and work with the federal government. We'd work with the local BLM guy or the local Forest Service guy. We can't do that anymore because the decisions are now all made in Washington, D.C., right? The locus of the decisions have, for a large part, changed. And it's really, they're made in Washington, D.C., and partially on social media issues. And so because wetlands are such a large part of Alaska, I came to the opinion we need to do that if we're going to control our destiny as a state. That is, back when we could work with folks, it was a little different. But, I mean, now the major decisions are all made in Washington, and we just need to take his money back. Now, that is advocacy. That is not, I've tried to be.
Right. Well, I was going to say, because what I heard you say is that a lot of it was made like via social media, and the people in Washington, D.C., the implication being that they haven't been on the ground here. They don't know the issues as well as they should.
They don't. I mean, if you look at the discussion of the Willow Project, you can like or dislike the discussion, but nobody referenced the conclusions of the EIS, right? It just wasn't part of the social media discussion. If you look at when I used to go to BLM, we were all discussing the science. The discussion has changed.
I mean, I will use Willow to pivot to coal, maybe.
Okay.
So I think you can talk about Willow without referencing the EIS, just in terms of, and I know some people would say, well, we're going to get the oil from somewhere, so better to get it from Alaska than to get it from the Middle East.
Let me use greenhouse gases as a discussion of Greens Creek.
Okay.
Greens Creek, they're doing an EIS for the expansion. Greens Creek does a lot of silver, a lot of industrial minerals. So let's just use zinc as an example. Zinc is used to anodize nails, culverts, things like that. We're not going to use less zinc and less nails if Greens Creek exists. But so the question is, if you care about greenhouse gases, the question is not, well, how much do they produce? And is this alternative going to produce more than this one? It's how much per ton of product. Because we're going to have as much zinc use in the world, whether or not Greens Creek exists. So the question is Greens Creek a low greenhouse gas producer or a high greenhouse gas producer? And I would argue Greens Creek is very low because it's underground, not open pit. It's existing, not a new mine. And because the electricity comes from hydro. So as a result, if you look at Greens Creek, they're a very low greenhouse gas producer. And so we should be doing for greenhouse gas resources, we should be saying, we want to expand that. And when we compare alternatives, we should compare alternatives by saying, what is the greenhouse gas per ton of product? That's a reasonable way to look at it. That's not how anybody was looking at green. That's not the comments that I saw in the Greens Creek stuff was not about that, even from EPA. It was just like, how big is it? And the same is true to some extent of Willow. The question is like, we are going to have some level of oil and gas. So where should we produce it from? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of producing it from Willow? So right after they approved Willow, they then, which lots of people hated, they then approved a whole raft of leases in the Gulf of Mexico, offshore. And you're like, onshore, offshore, like what's the environmental degradation here? And then you look at the where the benefits go in terms of Willow, and it was really supported very heavily by the North Slope Borough. And that discussion was not happening the way it should.
I'm going to pivot to coal.
Sure, please do.
So, coal feels very old-fashioned. Coal feels very 19th century. And so I think for me, as a South Central middle of Anchorage legislator, talking about coal mining just seems like I can't believe, and the building of a new the power plant in Fairbanks, the coal power plant. I mean, it just seems very.
So we have a greenhouse gas discussion with coal.
Yes,
right. To some extent, the same way we aren't going to be off oil, we aren't going to be off coal for a while, just because it's so expensive. The only other thing I would add, people can think whatever they think, and coal burns 1 point something or other the amount of greenhouse gas than does natural gas. But so the only thing that there are some ways to decrease greenhouse gases from coal. One of is the cogeneration of heat, so that the power plant produces a lot of heat for the downtown Fairbanks, which would have to be generated in some fashion. So when you look at the total production of greenhouse gases from coal, you can't compare it only to electricity. You have to compare it also to heat, and it does favorably there. But clearly the federal government and clearly as we ratchet down on greenhouse gases, those technologies like coal, which tend to produce more per kilowatt hour, are going to have a harder time.
I'd like to play a couple of clips from a U.S. Senate hearing on climate change in the Arctic. This hearing was chaired by Senator Lisa Murkowski in 2015. The first clip we will hear is Minnesota Senator Al Franken discussing the melting of permafrost due to climate change and how that has enabled drilling for new wells.
Fuels.
Okay, so we have a bit of an ironic situation here, do we not? I think everyone sees that the burning of fossil fuels is creating opportunity to find more fossil fuels to burn.
It is obviously ironic, yes.
Yeah. It's funny how ironic it is. It's hilarious.
The second clip is of Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders from that same 2015 hearing regarding Alaska's request for federal aid from climate change, while at the same time advocating for additional drilling.
Well, some of you, at least, are in favor of more production of fossil fuel, which is ultimately destroying the very communities that your people live in. That does not make a lot of sense to me in all respect. What am I missing?
That is ridiculous. I'm sorry. We need an industrial policy that looks at how we decrease the greenhouse gases. There is no, I think we need to think about it, how we do it. But there is no possible use, there is no possible industrial policy that doesn't our standard of living dramatically, which takes us off of new oil and gas for some period of time. That is not saying we shouldn't be pursuing solar, wind, carbon capture, geothermal,
more hydro,
all of that. Gerbils running on tread wheels, whatever. But there is no policy that doesn't involve some level of continued reliance on oil and gas for a long term during the transition. I mean, it's sort of interesting with China. China has no oil and gas. They're all coal. And China even aggressively going to solar, and I don't know whether they're doing that anymore, but they certainly were doing that, and electric vehicles. There's no way China doesn't have coal for a long time, even if they decrease it. So even a realistic, aggressive policy to decrease our greenhouse gases that involves all of those things probably involves some level of continued oil and gas and coal.
I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so glad we're having this discussion, because I think that there are folks who would be shocked that I had a guest on who's saying this, because I've been kind of grouped in the far left greeny caucus. So I appreciate
what I'm saying. I hope is just math. I mean, there are a lot of people whose heart I believe, but you still have to do math.
But on the other side, I think that there are folks who seem so annoyed and to disregard so much the concern regarding climate change and global warming.
I certainly hope I've not come off that way.
No, you haven't. But I just want to say that there are folks out there, who the drill baby drill people, who completely disregard any concern about climate change.
Oh, yeah. No, I agree with that. I mean, Trump's recent remarks about EVs. Yeah, I agree.
We're getting towards the end of our time. Your sister, your sister came to Alaska as well.
Right.
I mean, so how did that happen? I just want to say, she was a U.S. attorney under Obama for eight years.
Right.
Yeah. I guess tell us exactly what was her role? What was
she
her
was
job?
the U.S. attorney under Obama for 8 years. She was the head federal prosecutor in civil. I used to actually give lectures to my clients on, you better comply with all our laws. And the lecture was called How Not to Meet My Sister.
And your sister's name is?
Karen Loeffler.
Karen Loeffler.
So I was up here. She was at a law firm in Minnesota, and she was coming up annually we do some, trip out in the backcountry in Prince William Sound and elsewhere. And she realized she had more fun up here than she was having in Minnesota, so she moved up.
Bob Loeffler, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you to our listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email eastanchoragebookclub@gmail.com. That's eastanchoragebookclub, all one word, @gmail.com.